people always say the good stuff before I start recording. So say what
Okay.
you were just going to say, and then we'll like start the podcast.
Okay. So, a lot of times when people are diagnosed with a chronic illness, they then tend to their identity can shift, and it can shift so that they identify themselves by that illness.
Absolutely.
It can kind of take over. And I know when I was working as a pediatric physical therapist, it was not uncommon for therapists, even some parents, to identify, for instance, a child who has Down syndrome as a Down syndrome kiddo without, essentially eliminating all of the other kind of facets of their personality and who they are as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I don't think that's an uncommon thing with
No.
those of us who are diagnosed with a chronic illness. We tend to be like, oh, well, I'm an RA patient, or I'm a lupus patient, or I'm chronic kidney disease patient, whatever that might be.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times that kind of jumps to the top of the list in how we identify ourselves. And so life coaching has really helped me recognize that that's just a piece of who I am. That's not the entirety. And honestly, at this point in my life, I actually have 3 autoimmune diagnoses.
Yeah,
Which, again, not uncommon once you kind of have one.
totally.
And so that has been super helpful in terms of me identifying, like, okay, I'm a wife and a nana and a mom, and I love to quilt and I love to do these other things. And yes, I do have these diagnoses. And yes, I do have to make accommodations sometimes in my day, but that's not all of who I am.
All right, welcome to the podcast and the show today. I have Sue with me. She's an incredible coach. Oh my gosh, Sue, tell me your last name.
Blair.
Blair. I know that brain fog moment. Sue Blair. We have met because we are both life coaches. And
Mhm.
Sue, if you want to just introduce yourself really quick, we're going to be talking about life coaching and how it's helped with chronic illness.
Sure. My name is Sue Blair, and I am a life coach certified through the Life Coach School, and had the privilege of meeting Shelby through um, a mutual friend who was also a life coach. And so she was gracious enough to ask me to talk with you about kind of my experience, life coaching related to managing a chronic illness.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
And I think that there's like a time and space, especially for chronic illness with coaching. I think there's
Yeah.
a part where especially when you first get the diagnosis as
Yes.
well, like you really like it can be earth shattering because
Oh,
you may
yes.
not know that that's happening, or you knew that something was going wrong but you didn't know what it was, and now you have a
Yes.
name. There's a part where I really do kind of feel like it's healthy to go into that almost like I say this very gently, but almost that victim place where it's like,
Yes.
oh, this happened to me. Like I
Yes.
think that's something that you really have to go through and not
Yes.
push that away. But
Right.
then once you recognize like this diagnosis happened,
Yes.
and I will likely have this diagnosis or some version of this for the
Right.
rest of my life. It doesn't
Yes.
have to rule my life, and I
Right.
can look at the symptoms that come along
Yes.
with it. And that's part of what I think I want to ask you too about
Yes.
how life coaching has helped manage a lot of the
Yes.
symptoms that you've had.
Yes.
So,
Well, I think for me, and I absolutely relate to what you just said. Um, I When I received my Crohn's diagnosis, we had literally just moved to Alexandria. I was hospitalized 3 days after we moved, and my husband had just started a new job, so it was a wee bit stressful for him.
yeah.
Um, and that diagnosis came completely out of the blue. I knew there were some GI things going on. I had no idea the extent.
Mhm. Mhm.
And to receive that diagnosis and to know that this was not something that I could take a couple rounds of antibiotics and I'd be okay. I could do, whatever, whatever, like, brief limited treatment, and I life would return to normal. I knew that this was something that I was going to be dealing with. And I did have that reaction where I was very much down in the dumps, very much the
Yeah.
victim, very
Yeah.
just really devastated. Like,
Absolutely.
oh my gosh, how am I going to go forward with this? Because at that point, I also was really not able to eat a whole lot.
Mhm.
And, the idea of family dinners or going out to dinner with my husband, or it was just
Yeah.
like, how is this all going to work?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so yes, I think you have to be in that place. I am very fortunate. I have a pretty good friend who I met through quilting when we lived in
Uh-huh.
Chicago, who has Crohn's disease and has had it since she was about 13 years old.
Mhm.
And she has been an absolute blessing in terms of being able to talk to her. And her comment to me is basically, ask me anything. I've been through all of it,
Oh.
and there's nothing that's embarrassing. Ask me anything. And shared with me some very, very, very personal things, which I
Mhm.
had no idea about previously.
Yeah.
And that for me was a very hopeful thing.
Mhm.
But yes, you do. I think you do have to kind of have that, the bottom falls out kind of thing in order to then decide how I want to handle this going forward.
Yeah, and start to rebuild because
Yes.
I think, when I was handed my diagnosis, the doctor, I was just talking about this today. The doctor told me, he's like, you'll never have kids again and you'll never exercise again. And I like started bawling
Well,
in his
yeah,
office. And he's like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm 31 years old. And like, what do you think is wrong with me?
exactly.
And it can be really shocking, but from that place, it's like, I know I'm only 31 years old. I know I have a lot of years to live. Like,
Yes.
at least I was hoping at that time, and thankfully,
Right.
because of organ transplant, I do have a
Yes.
lot of years to live.
Yes.
But they didn't give me any guide of like, "Oh, and now here you go. Here's how you live with a chronic illness.
Right.
Here's the things that you're gonna need to take care of." Like, there's no guide. It's like,
No.
figure it out, and most doctors will give you a pretty grim grim
Yes.
prognosis,
Yes.
and we know the power of the placebo. When
Exactly.
you when somebody of authority, like a doctor, tells you
Mhm.
something, like, "This is how it's gonna be,"
Exactly.
it just puts such you into such a fear state
Absolutely.
that you really latch onto those things. It's very easy to do that.
Oh, yes.
Luckily for me, at that point, I also have, like, quite I don't know if you've taken Gretchen Rubin's 4 Tendencies quiz. I am the rebel, and
Okay.
I'm like, "Watch me."
Yeah,
So I do a little bit of
exactly.
that, but
Sure.
but there's, yeah, there's something to be said about not having a very clear pathway of what
Mhm.
to do and what to expect other
Right.
than the medical, community just kinda tells you, "Don't expect too much. Your life
Right.
is probably gonna be really hard for the rest of your life,"
Right. Exactly.
which is, like, the
Yeah.
opposite of
Yes.
what I think they should be telling us.
Absolutely. And it's so funny that you say this because I think about, again, going back to when I was a pediatric physical therapist, and I would
Yeah.
see these children who, because I worked with birth to three,
Mhm.
and these parents would, oh, we have doctor appointment on such and such day. And then you'd see them for the next visit and they're devastated because the doctor has said, they're never going to walk. They're never going to talk. They're never going to, all of the negatives of what they're never going to do.
Mhm.
And then honestly, I I guess to an extent I understand from the physician's perspective. At the same time, they're just like eliminating all kinds of hope from parents.
Exactly.
It does, though, in some cases, serve as a huge motivator. Like
Mhm.
you said, the rebel of parents are will look at it and be like, "Oh yeah, my child's never going to walk. Let me show you." And And so, yes, I think to an extent we have to have that, because, you receive these diagnoses and it's like, oh, that came out of left field and where do I go now? Uh,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
beauty of it is you get to decide.
Amen to that.
You
So,
can sit and wallow in it if you wish.
yeah,
And there are people who do,
yeah.
but
And I mean, there's no judgment if you need to wallow
no,
sometimes. Sometimes you
no,
need to wallow. No judgment here,
absolutely.
my loves.
Oh,
But
absolutely, absolutely. And I'm not
no,
saying
you're
you
not at
shouldn't, and
all.
I'm
But
not
I'm just
saying
saying,
there aren't days even, well into it when you wake up and it's just like, oh, we're having a really tough day here. And,
yeah.
oh, I think things are flaring up a little bit and really don't want to have to call the doctor because I know what's coming in terms of
Hmm.
testing and everything else. But yeah, there are times that you just have to do that because that's part of taking care of yourself.
Yeah. But then again, like I was saying, there's this invitation to rebuild your life
Yes.
and restructure it in a
Hmm.
way that serves you so well and really
Yes.
promotes that healing. Because what I found with most people that I talk to who experience chronic illness, chronic fatigue, is that they want to say yes. We're
Hmm.
generally people pleasers. We
Right.
want to put other people first.
Absolutely.
I'm like, I have actually thought about donating a kidney like pretty much my whole life. I was
Hmm.
like, are you kidding me? Like, I want to be the one giving the kidney, not
Right.
getting it. Like,
Right.
that sounds terrible to me. But with this,
Hmm.
with these personality types that we, potentially have, um, when you don't say no, when you know that you should, your
Yes.
body says no for you.
Exactly.
And that's a lot of the symptoms that I
Hmm.
see with people that have chronic fatigue or experience chronic illness
Absolutely.
is the symptoms flare when there's stressors that they're not
Yes.
dealing with well. They're not
Yes.
emotionally taking care of themselves. And so
Yes.
body's like, all right, I got this. You can't deal with this.
Yes.
I know what to do.
Exactly.
Here we go.
Exactly. And it's actually funny that you say that because when we were getting ready to move, um, the situation in terms of my husband changing jobs and us moving from Central Virginia to Northern Virginia, that whole process in terms of a job change and a move actually happened very quickly.
Hmm.
And we were in a market real estate wise that we sold our house within 24 hours and we were moving within like 3 weeks.
Hmm.
And there were days that like I was literally doubled over in pain, but I'm still doing things. And my husband is saying to me, you have got to slow down. And my response was always, but I've got to get this done.
Exactly.
And so, yes, there's that tendency in terms of the perfectionism and the people pleasing and the just all of that that causes us to not recognize what we need to do to take care.
Yeah. And to really call in support
Yes.
because I think we're
Yes.
so hyper independent.
Yes.
We used to live in groups. We used to live in communities. My husband's
Yes.
in the Air Force, so I habitually get ripped up from my roots and have to
Yes.
build a whole new community
Yes.
each time we move somewhere. I mean, I had my biggest I don't know if I would call it a flare anymore, but I had my biggest flare when we had moved to Florida. I'd had my third baby. She was 8 weeks old. We moved across the world when she was 8 weeks
Mhm.
old. My oldest was 5 to Alabama. Then we moved to California for a high level training for my husband for a year, and then to Florida before she was 1.5 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And I got
With
there.
with
Yeah.
3 very little people.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I get there in January of 2014. I immediately sprained my ankle so bad, like I couldn't even walk. The movers were coming in delivering our things and
Mhm.
I was just had to sit there and couldn't even watch them. And
Sure.
then I started sleeping 12 hours a night. I'd fall asleep at 7 at night, wake up at 7 in the morning. And then when my toddler took a nap, I took another 2 or 3 hour nap every day. I was like,
Mhm.
what is wrong with me?
Yes.
And it really was just so much stressors that my body did not know how to handle it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And we don't I think I'm sure to some extent it occurs in men. My perception is that it happens more frequently in women.
Well, we're mostly we're more diagnosed with autoimmune conditions as well.
Exactly. And we're very often put in the role of that caregiver.
Yes.
And when we have a spouse who's being transferred, we manage everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From dealing with getting the house ready to put it on the market, to talking with the movers and talking with whomever and getting children settled in, whether it's daycare, preschool, or school,
Mm-hmm.
with getting things set up with whatever church we might attend, to, I mean, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we don't have it built in that we need to take care of ourselves.
Exactly.
And that is one thing that life coaching has definitely helped me with.
Yeah.
As
Tell me
well.
a little bit about that.
It's just really made me, I think it comes from the idea that my worth is already set.
Ooh, I love that concept. It's like my favorite one to teach.
It
So
is.
tell a little bit more about this. So somebody's like, here's that, and they're like, your worth is already set.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So what that means is that I am every bit as valuable as every other human being on the planet.
Mhm.
And that I didn't decide, and no one else decided how much I was worth. And that my worth doesn't depend on whether I'm healthy, whether I have or don't have a chronic illness. It doesn't depend on what my weight is. It doesn't depend on whether I am home full time or whether I work outside the home.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't depend on how many quilts I make or how many books I read or how fancy a meal I prepare. None of that.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. And I know you and I had mentioned Cam Nichols and his
Oh,
quote,
yes.
and that's, if I am breathing, I am worthy. If my heart is beating, I am worthy. Which is an amazing reminder to me. And Dara Thomason also talks about, she says, when a baby is born, we don't look at that baby and say, oh, well, you're not worthy because you can't feed yourself, or because you need to wear diapers, or whatever it might be. And so at what point does this beautiful, perfect little human being become unworthy?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, if we recognize that we are worthy, we recognize that we're worth taking care of.
Ooh, yes. Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Well, I look at now, because I have grandchildren, I look at my grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
and they're definitely little human beings, and they have their good days and their bad days, like all of us. I don't look at them and say, oh, well, because you're having a meltdown, you're no longer worthy of my love, or no longer worthy to be cared for.
Right.
We need to take care of you. We need to help you calm yourself down. We need to figure out what's causing the meltdown, and how we can maybe moderate the situation so we don't have that happen again.
Mm-hmm.
But just that we all need to have our needs met.
Yes.
And we need to be able to figure out the best way for us to manage our stressors so that our bodies don't rebel and get really sick.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, like, how has learning about your emotions affected your physical health?
That's been a very interesting thing for me. I think, like a lot of people, a lot of adults, I wasn't necessarily taught how to manage my emotions.
Yeah.
And I was taught that things needed to be happy and positive all the time.
Correct.
And
Wait, they don't? Isn't that how it's supposed to be? I thought that's how it's supposed to be.
exactly. So this idea that life is 50-50, that life is 50% good and 50% not so great. And sometimes within that not so great is absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
But that's totally normal.
Exactly.
It gives you some breathing room
Hmm.
in terms of caring for yourself. So when some of us have a tendency to beat ourselves up because the day isn't going well, or something we thought we had done really well falls apart, we're able to kind of look at it and say, oh, that's okay. It's just, it's part of the 50% that didn't go well.
Yeah.
And it's not the end of the world.
And it doesn't have anything to do with my worth.
Right. And it has nothing to do with whether I'm a good person or not,
Exactly.
or whether I'm a worthwhile person or not.
Hmm. Hmm.
I did my best with this and it still didn't work, and that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome.
So yeah.
Well, if people want to get in touch with you, Sue,
Yes.
or before I even say that, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners before we wrap up? Any other last messages for them? There's somebody listening today that maybe is new to having a chronic illness. Like, what would you want them to know?
Um, I would say that well, one thing I would want them to know is don't spend a lot of time looking up things online.
Amen.
Because what I found in my experience is that people only post the negative stuff online. And I'm not saying that to minimize whatever symptoms or challenges they may be having,
Hmm.
but you do get to make decisions about how you choose to go forward
Yes.
and what's going to work best for you. And every single one of us, I'm sure I could be in a room with 50 other people who have Crohn's disease, and it's all going to be slightly different. We're all going to have a slightly different experience of that same diagnosis. And so you just need to listen to your body and pay attention to that.
Oh, I
Um,
love that so much. Joe Dispenza has a book called You Are the Placebo. Have you heard that one?
I have heard of the book.
Yeah.
Yes, I've not read that one.
Because that's been something that's really helped me because
Mhm,
I am a researcher by nature, got my
mhm,
master's in speech language pathology, wrote my thesis. Like, we
mhm.
love the research, love the
Yep,
journal articles.
absolutely.
Every journal article that I would read about kidney disease was terrifying.
Mhm,
And I really had to look at, hey, hang on. There's look at the sample size, like I mean, not the sample
right,
size, but who's in the sample.
right.
There's a lot more going on sometimes than what meets the eye. And there's a lot
Yes,
of places that I do have control over lifestyle factors that could
exactly,
really help me. And part of
exactly.
that is having awareness and understanding of emotional health that so many
Yes,
people don't. And that really, really amps up just how well you might do with a physical challenge.
absolutely, absolutely. And another piece of that is, with understanding your emotional health and really taking care of it. In my case as well, that has allowed me to lose a pretty significant amount of weight. And in addition to kind of like the obvious kind of fun benefits of, oh, I get to buy smaller size clothes and I can move more easily, in terms of chronic illness, that significantly decreases the inflammation in your body,
Hmm.
which is going to help decrease the symptoms that you have.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily going to eliminate them, but it also, you're not doing, very much emotional eating. You're able to process your emotions and recognize that the whole spectrum of them is completely normal.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. And like recognizing that if losing weight is a part of your journey, then
Mhm.
whatever weight that you get to that is in alignment with what feels really good with your body is
Right.
also going to help with your symptoms as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yes. Yeah,
That's beautiful.
absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. So
Sure.
great. So
Thank
if
you for
people
having
want to
me.
get in touch with you, Sue, you want to tell them a little bit about what you do and how they can find you?
Sure. So I have a coaching practice. I'm trained through the Life Coach School, and I have a coaching practice for women with chronic illness in midlife and beyond who want to either lose weight or just work on helping them feel better about themselves. And the best way to reach me, it would be to email me. And that address is Sue, SUE, at coachingwithsue.com.
Perfect. And that'll be in the show notes too. So if you're just
Perfect.
listening, you can
Awesome.
go ahead and click on that. And it has
Okay.
been my pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much, Sue.
Thanks so much, Shelby. I really appreciate it.